According to recent war games, the US military gets crushed by China and Russia. It's a major anniversary for Tibet. And the Chinese regime is cracking down on more religious believers. That and more fun stuff on this week's China News headlines. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for the latest China news and click that notification bell icon. That way, you get an alert each time we publish a new episode. So, this week's China News headlines. The U.S. spends about $600 billion a year on the military, more than the next 7 biggest spending countries combined. All right, USA number 1. So that means the U.S. can win any war, right? The answer is, maybe not. That's at least according to recent war games. The simulation was U.S. or blue forces against China and Russia, or red forces. Very appropriate color choices.
In our games, when we fight China or Russia, and we've written about this in unclassified forums at RAND, blue gets its ass handed to it. Not to put too fine a point on it. We lose a lot of people, we lose a lot of equipment, we usually fail to achieve our objective of preventing aggression by the adversary, which is a headline.
Yeah, it is. In fact, here's that headline. Now, I know you might be shocked by this. Don't worry, you wouldn't be the only one. The House Armed Services Committee was also shocked.
The members of Congress who were on the House Armed Services Committee in the SAS, they were shocked. They were going, holy moly, I didn't have any idea it was this bad.
Holy moly, I didn't have any idea it was this bad? I mean, I didn't have any idea it was this bad is not what I want the House Armed Services Committee saying. So why is it so bad? It turns out, if the U.S. were to get into a conventional war with Russia or China, U.S. bases, and in particular their satellite and communications network, are vulnerable in ways the U.S. is not prepared to deal with. Take, for example, the F-35. It's an unstoppable $100 million warplane that becomes pretty much useless if a Chinese or Russian ballistic missile blows up the aircraft carrier it's sitting on.
In every case that I know of, the F-35 rules the sky when it's in the sky, but it gets killed on the ground in large numbers. So in the first 5 days of the campaign, we're looking really good, but after the second 5 days, it's not looking so hot. Those are the things that the war games show over and over and over. And so we need a new American way of war without question.
At this point, I'd just like to say, I, for one, welcome our Russian and or Chinese overlords. I'd like to remind them that, as a trusted TV personality, I can be helpful in rounding up others to toil in their underground uranium mines. So what would this new American way of war look like? Well, for the low, low price of just $24 billion more a year, you can find out.
For $24 billion a year, I will assert that if we focus that on the right stuff, we can move the needle against China and Russia.
What's the right stuff? Mostly missiles, apparently, including missiles to shoot down enemy missiles and drones. But it would also include research and development, as well as hardening U.S. communications networks. Because, as was pointed out, you can spend all you want to get as many planes in the air and ships in the sea, but a $1 billion ship that sinks because you didn't cough up for a $1 million decoy is probably not good. But I get it. $24 billion is a lot to add to our defense budget. That's why I have my own foolproof plan. I can simply use my security blanket. Since I was a little boy, all I had to do was hide under it, and then the bad things can't get me. Which is why I'm going to do the rest of the show underneath it. This week marks... what's that, Shelley? Oh, fine, I'll take it off. For a few minutes. This week marks the 60th anniversary of the Dalai Lama's escape from China in 1959. Obviously, this anniversary was marked by protests and demonstrations from Tibetans all over the world. And the Communist Party continues to say it did nothing wrong in Tibet. State-run Xinhua said life is so much better in Tibet now since the Communist Party took power, and that the Dalai Lama's separatist plots are doomed to failure. Shelley, are you sure I can't do the episode under my blankie? fine. Anyways, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom says the Chinese regime is at war with faith. In a recent visit to Hong Kong, Sam Brownback criticized the Chinese regime's persecution of the Uighur ethnic minority of Xinjiang. The Trump administration is deeply concerned and considered it a deliberate attempt by Beijing to redefine and control these Muslim minority groups, their identity, culture, and faith. Brownback also called out the situation in concentration camps, where more than 1 million Uyghurs are being held. We've been putting out very clearly that this is a horrific situation that's taking place in Xinjiang. But that's ridiculous. According to Chinese state-run media, they're not concentration camps. They're concentration camps, where Uyghurs can concentrate on learning job skills.
The centers are targeting the source of Xinjiang's violent incidents with jobs and education.
Looks more like a sweatshop. But yes, these vocational training skills are combating Muslim extremism. I mean, you don't know how bad it was in Xinjiang before these camps.
Women were once not even allowed to wear a dress or put on makeup.
Wow, sounds just like the rest of China during the Cultural Revolution. That wasn't extremism. So clearly, the West is just trying to twist things to undermine China. In his speech, Brownback also talked about the persecution of Christians. But that's justified because Western powers are trying to use Christianity to subvert China. At least according to the head of the Communist Party-run official Protestant Church. And for Christians who don't belong to state-approved churches, the Communist Party is shutting their churches down, jailing their pastors, and even rewriting the Bible. Brownback basically called out the fact that the Chinese government attacks believers of nearly every faith in every region of China. But that's just because the Communist Party is trying to fill out their religious persecution bingo card. In addition to the Uyghurs and Christians, Brownback talked about how the party is persecuting Tibetans and Falun Gong practitioners. Only one more and they get bingo. Who will the lucky group be? What? Zoroastrianism? Well, that's not going to work. I guess they'll just have to start over and keep persecuting until they win. Of course, you won't hear about that on Chinese state-run media, especially if you're in the U.S., because the U.S. head of China's state-run CCTV has left the U.S. Her name is Ma Jing. I think it's time she updated her LinkedIn profile to fled the country. On CCTV's American TV broadcast, it goes by CGTN, or China Global Television Network. Change the name and no one will find out what it really is. The CGTN headquarters in the U.S. is in Washington, D.C., about 7 blocks from the White House. CGTN reaches 30 million households in the U.S., but the Justice Department has been asking CGTN some pretty uncomfortable questions about its links to the Chinese state. CGTN has maintained the Chinese government absolutely does not tell them what to broadcast. Sure, their news stories have to meet the state's censorship guidelines, and they have no independence, but technically, that's not the same thing. The issue is, according to the Foreign Agents Registration Act, Ma Jing needed to disclose her working relationship with the Communist Party. But that's hard because the Communist Party likes to keep those relationships kind of secret. I mean, it's not soft power if it's all exposed to the sunlight for everyone to see. It kind of dries out and gets crumbly. So, the answer is simple. Flee the country. Works every time. And before you go, now is the time I answer a question from a member of the China Uncensored 50 Cent Army, fans who support the show with $1 or more on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Blue Fox asks, Chris, does the U.S. have any counters to the Chinese and Russians, as well as other countries' threat of EMP weapons? Well, as we learned today, the U.S. may not be so prepared for that. China and Russia are building electromagnetic pulse or EMP weapons. Basically, they disrupt electronic equipment, which is why this American only relies on his guns. And I've got excellent gun control. But for the rest of the U.S. military, or even the entire infrastructure of the United States, EMP weapons present a serious potential problem. Obviously, I don't know the details of the inner workings of the U.S. military, But since this is such a widely known issue, I can only assume some kind of steps are being taken. But we won't know how successful they are until, as they say, push comes to shove. Which is why, in the worst case scenario, I have a surefire fallback. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.